Time now for Talking Points with Charlie Kirk, the founder of Turning Point USA. Charlie, earlier this week, everybody now knows, you and your communications director, Candace Owens, were eating breakfast at a restaurant in Philadelphia, and something happened. Just for any new listeners out there, give us a brief overview of what happened to you in Philadelphia.
Sure, it was quite bizarre. You know, Candace and I were just minding our own business. I was in Philadelphia to meet with some graphic designers. She lives in Philly. And we got it to the breakfast place right at 8 a.m., took our seat, and I leaned over to her a couple minutes after we were seated, and I said, "Hey, Candace, over there, there's some Antifa people eating on the other side of the restaurant." She's like, "Oh, no way," and we kind of joked about it and didn't think much of it. About half an hour later, we look out the window, and all of a sudden there were a couple dozen Antifa people beginning to organize against us. And so we quickly paid our bill. And as we saw, the crowd was growing and growing and growing, and eventually grew to over 50 people, paid our bill, and then they came inside and started calling us neo-Nazis and fascists, brought outside, confronted directly. I had water thrown on me and egg thrown at me. They were calling Candace the worst things you could possibly call another human being. And it really taught us a lot. This is the radical left that is coming after conservatives. They are the most intolerant people you could possibly come across. And they found it upon themselves to disrupt the peace, literally come into a private establishment and come after a black woman and call her a Nazi and a white supremacist. You try and figure that one out.
Here's the thing. The fact that you guys handled this the way you did, you were simply minding your own business. You were the adults in the room. You were being screamed at, heckled at, whistled at. The things they called Candace, if it were anybody else who called her those names, this would be front page news. And so I think it's the first abject lesson I want to point out here is the only really way to respond to these people is to not do anything or respond in any way that legitimizes their stupidity. Is that fair to say?
It is so spot on. And so we always try to go about everything with grace and with patience and self-control. And right before we walked outside, we knew it was going to be rather combative. And I turned to Candace and she turned to me, and we almost said the exact same thing at the exact same moment, which was, let's just take it easy. Let's just be patient and be graceful. You know, we're not here to get in a brawl or get in a fight. And the number one piece of feedback I have received, the two pieces of feedback, number one, people said, "Oh, I would have fought those guys. You're lucky I wasn't there," which is an understandable reaction. The second of which is people have been commending Candace and I for showing that sort of restraint and that sort of whimsy. And look, we were not disrupting their breakfast, nor would we ever. They were disrupting us, and we still went about it with, I think, a token of self-discipline and self-control that others would not have reacted in that situation with. But thank goodness we reacted the way we did, because otherwise it would have turned into something that it shouldn't have turned into. And that's what they wanted it to become. They wanted it to become a political brawl.
That's right, and I want to frame that because what you guys did was classic American, right? You listened, you let them have their way, you went about your business, and that to me highlights the anti-Americanism of what these people were doing.
Yes.
And the fact that they're chanting the word bourgeoisie, I'll guarantee you that half of them, 80% of them couldn't spell it, and half of them don't even know what it means. But let that sink in for a second. This is right out of the socialist playbook.
It's Marxist.
They're Marxists. This isn't about social justice. It's not about equality. This is nothing more than using the heckler's veto to shut down speech they don't like in a really, really fascist way.
What a wise statement there. Heckler's veto. That's exactly what it is. It's the majoritarian mob mentality. For the viewers that are watching this that don't know, the mob, they're not protesters, the mob, they were chanting, 1, 2, 3, F the bourgeoisie, which is a traditional Marxist chant. I felt like this was the Bolsheviks versus the Mensheviks. It was like the Red Terror or something. And like you said, they probably couldn't even spell it if their life depended on it. But look, here's what we have to understand, and this is something you and I have connected on before, and I want to reiterate this. This has very little to do about politics and a lot to do about broken people. I mean, think about how sad and sick of an individual you have to be to do this, to go into a private establishment, to mobilize the way they did, to bring drums, to bring bullhorns, to bring whistles, and scream as primal noises at two peaceful individuals that you might disagree with, that you're of the same age, we like to say hurt people hurt people. And that's exactly right. These are broken, troubled individuals that, quite frankly, I feel sorry for them. And I think that's an appropriate reaction. I've gone through a lot of thinking about that. I would never do that to a liberal, nor should I. I would never do that to a leftist. I would never do that to anybody. Because in America, you are rewarded the right to privacy and decency without having to be retaliated against through a mob in public. They see no such granting of that paradigm to exist. And your statement there is very wise and spot on.
Yeah, and it's not just anti-American. It's anti-American in the sense that it's anti-free speech, it's anti-free association, it's anti-privacy and boundaries. So anybody watching ought to be able to discern that on the one hand, you have rational people who, even if you disagree with them, can conduct and comport themselves with some sort of dignity. On the other hand, not only do you have all of those basic American foundational ideas being violated, what you just said is exactly right. This is the behavior of 2-year-olds. This is one prolonged tantrum. They're banging on pots and pans. They're whistling at you. They're resulting in invective and catcalling. It really demonstrates two things. One, not only is what they're doing contrary to freedom and liberty as it's expressed itself over the American experience for 250 years, it's also alien to any kind of civil discourse really anywhere in the world. And this is the kind of socialism that is creeping into every corner of America. Our schools, our Democrat politicians who cheer this kind of stuff. Maxine Waters, I know you've heard her name mentioned a lot in your interviews as well.
You're so spot on, and the way you're approaching this is very, very unique, and I have to give you credit because you're seeing this differently than just a political issue. And make no mistake, and I know you agree with this, this is fascism. It's exactly what they are pretending to resist. They say they're anti-fascists when they are acting like fascists. They're the ones that have such bad ideas they have to seek us out as individuals and try to silence us. And I want to make another thing perfectly clear, and Candace has been so wonderful on this. We are not victims. I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me or to feel sorry for Candace. I hate the whole victimhood thing. We're not. But what I do have concern about is I have concern about the college students that have to experience this that aren't Candace and Charlie Kirk. Because look, we can handle ourselves. If they really wanted to get physical, it wouldn't have ended well for them. Let's just put it that way. You don't want to mess with Candace Owens, right? She grew up in the hood. You mess with me, it's not going to go well. I'm being somewhat facetious, my friend. But I feel bad. I feel bad, and I'm scared for our students in Turning Point USA that have to go through this, because that's the real warning sign. So I don't want people to feel sorry for Charlie Kirk or for Candace Owens. The exact opposite. I want you to be aware that this is a culture war, and that if we do not make significant points of awareness and education, that these radicals are going to take over Congress again, and with it the remainder of the country. Yeah,
like you, I'm very interested in the teachability of this moment, both in terms of your behavior versus theirs. And that brings me to my next question. And I haven't heard you talk much about this. What kind of reaction, how did the other diners in the restaurant, how did the cashiers, maybe the serving people, when this was going on, how did the immediate people surrounding you react to it?
It's quite interesting. You can see in the famous video that Candace posted on Twitter, which now has been retweeted over 95,000 times, unbelievable number, and with over 3 million views. The waitress is like this. She's shell-shocked. She can't believe it. She's looking back and forth. Her whole world has been shook. I am of the approach that you go forth into tragedy with comedy. That's why I was smiling, because I feel that if we have a lighthearted approach to situations like this, you're less likely to retaliate in kind. And traditionally, responding anger with anger only escalates further. There's an old expression that do not fight with a pig, because they will bring you down to their own level and beat you with experience. And I'm not calling them pigs, and that's not what I'm saying. But there is some truth to that metaphor that they wanted to fight. Oh boy, would they have loved that. Are you kidding me? They would have loved to throw punches and this and have arrests. We gave them exactly what they didn't want. They've not encountered two people that would respond with whimsy and with lightheartedness and grace and patience and self-control. But I was very interested that there were no other diners that interceded. And you see this a lot. All it takes for evil to exist is for good men to do nothing. Most people will sit idly by and witness collision and tragedy while it happens in front of them. And you saw that in this instance. And this is a very teachable moment. I think you're spot on with this. And this could be shown to many younger audiences of political, philosophical, societal, and psychological distances and differences going on in this country, and spiritual ones as well.
I'm really glad you brought up that waitress, because I think this is one of the other lessons, besides the way you handle it versus the way they did. One of the other big lessons here is watching the reaction of the waitress and those few people that we could see in the video clip. Some of them are actually stunned into inaction. And that's where fascism, socialism, all of this left-wing social justice garbage creates the most casualties. By watching what you guys went through, and even though you handled it well, watching what you were subjected to, it's paralyzing on people who watch that. They've lost their ability, because of the anger and the irrationality of the mob, to actually stand up themselves in defense of what's right. And I've made this point all the time when I teach my university classes. Nazism began with non-Nazi Germans refusing to defend those who were being attacked. And when you see what a chilling effect those kind of mob scenes have on the average passerby who's not terribly political, who doesn't get involved in these kind of debates with their families, they just see that irrationality of the mob, and it really changes how they view people.
That's correct. And I'm going to go back to that Edmund Burke quote, all it takes for evil to exist is for good men to do nothing. And it was interesting to see just how people were put into paralysis. I think that's the right way to describe it, because of what was encountering in front of them. They're almost like, make it stop, which I get. I actually sympathize with that, because no one wants their Monday morning to be obliterated by crazy radicals. I do sympathize with that. But it also goes to show that you can be shell-shocked into inaction. And how long does that happen? How long is that sustained? It could be quite long. It could be years of inaction. People can convince themselves that there's nothing happening outside their door. And you have seen that through the great tragedies of the 20th century, that it is not the majority that actually fulfills the evil orders of the dictator. It's a small committed minority that goes about it with gusto and is able to convince the people not to interact on their behalf, which is a very, very interesting and spot-on point that you've made.
Besides the casual observer who has to deal with this, the other side of that coin, Charlie, is the authorities, the police, who, it's interesting, it's the radical left, the very people who were behaving like children with you, are the ones who call the police inveterately racist, who think that, like Elizabeth Warren came out and said, right, that our justice system from front to back is racist. This kind of nonsense. Let me ask you, in your dealings with the police and the authorities when they came to break up this scene, how were they? What were their attitudes like? And did they give you any commentary or advice that you think is worth sharing?
They were extraordinary, and they gave us compliments for restraining ourselves, and they were amazing. So just so everyone understands, every one of the protesters that were protesting us was white. And so I sent out a tweet that I think accurately described the insanity of what was going on. I said the following: white liberals were calling a black conservative, Candace Owens, a white supremacist for defending a black police force from white liberals who wanted to destroy a city that was 44% black. Go figure that one out, right?
That's really the place I want to wind this down. So everybody behaved really, really well, except the radical liberals, right? You have a police force that showed up. They did their job without having to arrest anybody, without having to interact violently with anybody. They were able to shield you. They also, like you guys, were really, really good about ignoring the worst of the taunts. We've seen that again. So everybody did their job here except the left-wing Antifa. And I think it shows, Charlie, what you've been saying for a long time, that if we stick to American values, if we honor American liberties, and we treat each other civilly, there is nothing that can be overcome, even this kind of quasi-fascist nonsense.
That's correct. And sometimes the best way to confront aggression is do not retaliate in kind. They don't know how to deal with that. They really don't, because, sometimes, fighters, they want to fight. And sometimes the best way to fight back, and it takes the most self-restraint, is to not punch back twice as hard. Now, there are times when you have to defend yourself. That was not one of those times. Candace and I were in complete and total control of the situation, and we handled ourselves correctly and properly. But we will win this fight, and we have the moral upper hand, and we're going to keep it.
Charlie, another chapter that you've just completed, you and Candace, in the long book of liberty. We're proud of you, and you stay well. We'll talk to you again soon.